Kevin Owens' recent return to SmackDown saw him strut along a red carpet rolled out by Vince McMahon himself, taking Kofi Kingston's spot in the Fastlane main event. It was the closest he has felt to relevant since winning the Universal title. KO took that vacant belt back in August 2016. Finally! Owens was a top guy on WWE's top brand. But like a lot of modern era WWE, it was better in theory than practice. In spite of KO's best efforts, everything went south in a god-awful title reign that presented the former prizefighter as an awful coward. Headbutting and bloodying Vince McMahon a year later was another false dawn, so forgive our cynicism when it comes to his latest re-emergence. But KO's various falls from grace won't be the last, and they certainly aren't the first. And WWE history is littered with other examples. I'm Andy for WhatCulture Wrestling, and here are 10 shocking times WWE pulled the plug on mega pushes. And yes, I'm gonna say push a lot, so get used to it. Number 10, Chris Jericho. The pop upon seeing Jericho's name splash across the Titantron in his awesome WWE debut still extracts goosebumps today, but there's less love for a SmackDown sequel a few weeks removed from the buzz. His in-ring debut drew derision from opponent Road Dogg and his DX buddies, foreshadowing his cards being marked by a failed series with locker room litmus worker X-Pac. It was enough for Vince McMahon to rein in on Y2J's push and suggest his contract, and I quote, wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Wow. Jericho moved rapidly and with great force to remedy these wrongs, but that match with Road Dogg was a stinker. While Y2J was always entertaining, it took a long time for him to truly escape the midcard. Number 9. The Radicals. Chris Benoit gave up on the WCW title to bet on himself in WWE, while Eddie Guerrero had been an impassioned heel and babyface at various points in his career. As part of the Radicals, the two were forced to be grizzled in-ring mechanics for months. After a debut that shook the industry during a period where WCW could still be considered competition, the four ship jumpers sidled up to authority figure Triple H after wrestling all of DX on their very first SmackDown. By WrestleMania, a mere 3 months later, all of them were trapped in the midcard. The initial mega push had been a false promise that would only ever be truly delivered to Benoit and Eddie many years later. Saturn and Malenko were rugged workers, but the WWE machine needed the star quality of their stablemates, and within 2 years, neither Dean nor Perry were even wrestling full time. Number 8. Tazz. As revealed in an interview with our own Adam Wilborn, Tazz knew the difference between over and being too over by the time he got to WWE, and his Royal Rumble 2000 pop was a case of the latter. Tazz had it all. His reputation bolstered by Paul Heyman's brilliant ECW booking, he was on home turf inside the hallowed halls of MSG, and received as such by the New York natives. The audience were loyal and extremely plugged into the global scene, and Tazz's arrival spoke to the excitement that came with the Monday Night Wars era's many talent trades. Mindful of that roar that greeted him, Tazz connected the dots. He knew his experienced colleagues in the backstage area wouldn't be as willing as fellow newbie Kurt Angle to put him over, and suffered the expected fate for his size when Vince McMahon started de-pushing him, including a crushing SmackDown loss to who else but Triple H. Number 7. Nathan Jones. Out of context, Nathan Jones' WWE tenure could be seen as a series of unfortunate events that allowed WWE to chew up and spit out a fallen star. In reality, it all made tragic sense. Gaining limited exposure from the failed World Wrestling All-Stars project, the Australian was plucked from obscurity because he was, well, an absolute unit. Promoted as an ex-con coming out to wreak havoc in WWE, a run as The Undertaker's sidekick felt off-kilter with these sinister segments, and it was apparent just how ill-equipped he was for a main stage push just weeks later. WrestleMania 19 brought the gimmick into further disrepute. Jones couldn't even be trusted to make a hot tag against A-Train and Big Show. Written off the pre-show, his contribution was reduced to a mere run-in, in which he botched a spin kick. Jones would disappear after an attempted heel turn later in the year, but neither he nor the audience were buying into anything anymore. Number 6. The Nexus. Before debuting, most of the Nexus were kind of faceless nobodies failing to become anything more than their mentors. Daniel Bryan was the only one not plucked from FCW, but he was given punishment booking as a way to bring him down to their level rather than attempting to raise them up to his. NXT Season 1 winner Wade Barrett was good as well, but all 8 looked like killers when they emerged together to literally destroy that episode of Raw. Their beatdown of John Cena was incredible pro wrestling, as they left an entire show in tatters. Bryan choking out Justin Roberts got him briefly split off from the angle and released from WWE, but the rest should have had career-enhancing summers from the mauling. Instead, they were all made to absorb big losses before John Cena thinned out their numbers with increasingly demeaning attacks. Then, the whole thing ended with a literal burial as Cena covered Barrett in chairs at TLC 2010. Number 5. Lacey Evans. Lacey Evans' bizarre main roster arrival hasn't delivered anything outwardly awful in the ring, aside from her uneven Royal Rumble debut, but it became more than a curio when Dave Meltzer reported plans to put her against SmackDown Women's Champion Asuka at WrestleMania 35. Without resorting to having her expose any further limitations, WWE have barely exposed her at all. Since her shaky start, she's simply walked down the ramp and back up again without so much as uttering a single word or throwing a single punch. Now that WrestleMania match could still occur, though Evans now finds herself even lower on WWE's totem pole than before. Moments with Heavy Machinery and other comedy acts not only appeared intentionally reductive, but the work of a company trying to elevate an unknown. That, clearly, was the plan at the Rumble, and it may have been her last shot. Number 4. Raven. Scott Levy swears to this day that Vince McMahon was overheard saying "Who the F hired Raven?" after spotting him backstage in 2000, and it's perhaps why his surprising arrival was inserted into commentary by Jim Ross at Unforgiven. Good old JR proffered shock, confusion and intrigue as Raven helped Tazz to victory over Jerry Lawler, but within weeks the former ECW and WCW star was reduced to mid-card rank and file on a roster that was too hot for him to handle. Few stars were wasted while WWE was at its most prosperous, and while Raven was a boon for the hardcore division, the gimmick wasn't ever as fleshed out as it had been during his tenures elsewhere. By the time he left in 2003, Raven wasn't even visually recognisable. Denim shorts and black tees were replaced with a black and white visage before resorting to actual wrestling tights ahead of his release. New Home TNA were only happy to return the character to its roots when he arrived there within days of his WWE release. Number 3. The Revival. They've rebounded slightly from the days of jobbing to the Lucha House Party, but chances of the Revival ever being considered top guys feel almost entirely dependent on which company they want to reach the summit of. Titles or not, it'll never be in WWE. In NXT, Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder transferred their love of old-school heel tag work into a display of contemporary brutal theatre. Enzo and Big Cass, DIY and American Alpha were made to suffer the pair at their worst if they couldn't handle them at their best, and for the most part, they absolutely couldn't. Ciampa and Gargano were first made to question each other because of the Revival. American Alpha suffered the pain of title defeat in the face of their skillful skullduggery. Enzo and Cass, on their best day, couldn't leave TakeOver London with more gaudy gold. All of this extended to their awesome main roster debut on 2017's Raw after Mania, but injuries and interruptions to their first year resulted in WWE losing interest. A Raw Tag Team title win can at least allow them to pretend to be all they say they are, even if they have never been more about tell than show. Number 2. Paige. Paige's 2014 main roster debut was the sort of call-up that any number of graduates could have benefited from since then, because even with the small botch, it was an effective way of trying to usher in a sea of change. The anti-diva was NXT Women's Champion at the time, and talked her way into a Divas title win against the dominant AJ Lee on the post-WrestleMania 30 edition of Raw. Surrounded not only by New Orleans natives, but also hardcore superfans and travelling Brits, Paige went down a storm in front of what almost felt like a hometown crowd. But she'd go down in flames by the end of the summer, and inadvertently taking AJ with her. The two were assembling decent displays with a pathetically small allocation across WWE's weekly schedule, but the lack of care and attention scuppered their chances of breaking out from the break slot that the Divas had been stuck in for years. Months spent working alongside Charlotte, Becky Lynch, Sasha Banks, and others in 2015 were not enough to reinvigorate Paige's act before a 2016 surgery sidelined her for over a year. Unfortunately, she'd be forced into early retirement within months of returning. And number 1, John Cena. Big John didn't just salvage a push during the Halloween 2002 episode of SmackDown, he saved his entire WWE career. Looking back at his Vanilla Ice turn with Stephanie McMahon tells the story of the moment he finally came out of his shell on the Blue brand, but deeper dives between these two moments reveal that his witty retorts were actually Hail Marys. Cena's debut earlier that year saw him go toe for toe with Kurt Angle and get an on-screen hat tip from The Undertaker, but he dropped off the map by October. The spectacular start had sagged, with fans failing to gravitate towards his babyface character despite Cena's best efforts and the $1 million smile that would later net him those exact riches. Far from being the total package that Vince McMahon was looking for, Cena was suddenly halfway out the door. A heel turn on part-time tag partner Billy Kidman would have gone completely without mention had it not been for the overblown rap bit reminding crowds that he existed, let alone now, as a villain.